My name is Karin Pettersson. I'm the political editor-in-chief of Aftonbladet. And with me I have Zeynep Tufekci, who is a writer, academic, a techno-sociologist, one of the coolest titles I can imagine. She's also one of the great minds thinking about the internet. I've been following her and reading her for a while, and she was one of the first and early voices really warning about what the consequences could be of this new information infrastructure that we are living with. And I guess let's just jump right into this. What was it that you saw when you started talking about possible negative effects of social media on truth and the public discourse, and what is happening now?
So let me start by saying that from the first moment, it was clear to me that it was both. I even wrote a piece saying, is the internet good or bad? Yes. Because it's the kind of technology that allows people to find one another in ways that would have been mediated by gatekeepers before. You know, in the past, you had to be published in the New York Times, you had to be on TV before you got attention. If you were living in a repressive country, it had to be the authoritarians or whoever's in power in that country had to permit you. And with these technologies, it meant that people could find one another in ways that just weren't possible before. But from day one, I thought, you know, we tend to think of the ways in which this is great because it lets Egyptian dissidents find one another. It lets Turkish dissidents find one another. It lets us challenge the mainstream gatekeepers of what they're keeping out. But it also lets the white supremacists and Nazis find one another. Like, it doesn't just work for one group. So there are ways in which we have built institutions since the Enlightenment, right? We have built the scientific enterprise. We have built the academic enterprise. Post-World War II, we have built, for better or worse, a kind of journalism with its own ethos. It wasn't perfect. It was never perfect. But there were ways in which it controlled what was in the public sphere. In Europe, you have all these hate speech laws, for example. For good reason, you have this history. And all of a sudden, you had a way in which people could bypass all of that. That meant everything that was underlying, that was still an issue, that we were controlling by keeping a lid on it. It was just going to come on loose. So what were we keeping a lid on? We were keeping a lid on a lot of things. Maybe in some ways, like in authoritarian countries, that's not good. They're keeping a lid on dissent. They're keeping a lid on politics. But in some places, we were also keeping a lid on racism and white supremacy. We were keeping a lid on, say, people who believed vaccination is just, a ploy to keep there. So it was all going to come unleashed. It's almost like, so I kept thinking, this is going to change everything. And in August of 2015, when Donald Trump announced he was running, the whole existing establishment, let's say, and I guess I'm kind of part of it. I'm an academic. I write for the New York Times. People were laughing at him. They were like, oh, what a funny guy, it's just a joke candidacy. And I sort of listened to him, and I started watching his social media, and I started going to his rallies to listen to him. And I thought, wait, he's hitting a nerve. He's reaching people in ways that are ways in which the established powers are blind to. So this is the thing, when you ask me, when did you first think it was a danger, it's also the first time I thought this is great. Yeah. Like, I've been feeling both feelings, analytically speaking, together since it just came through.
So you're talking about the loss of control of old institutions and old curators, and I'm a part of the media establishment, so it's a tragedy, basically. No, I'm just kidding, but I agree with you on that. But there seems to be something in this technology that isn't just letting people
Absolutely.
get the control.
Absolutely.
There seems to be something in this technology that promotes certain types of content. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
absolutely. So in the old establishment, I'm kind of part of it right now. There was an ethos that we failed from: truth, public service. So in the current environment, you do not have that ethos. What you have is
that? We talk about Facebook
right,
now,
Facebook
mostly,
and Google. I think people shouldn't ignore Google because YouTube. Let me give you an example. Right? I think this example makes kind of sense. On YouTube,
which is owned by Google.
which is owned by Google. Because I was studying Donald Trump, I started watching rallies of him on YouTube because I wanted to also quote from the rallies. I was there. I wanted to quote from it. So if you go to YouTube and watch a Donald Trump video, a rally, if you ever go to YouTube, there's like this column on the right that's sort of recommending things and it autoplays them. If you watch Donald Trump, YouTube starts recommending and autoplaying white supremacist videos to you. And it just goes downhill very fast. Like it starts with mild ones, it goes downhill. Now you might be thinking, oh, that's Donald Trump and that's just sort of, the right wing in politics. If you go and watch Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, which in the US are center left, it starts promoting conspiracy left. If you go to YouTube and watch a video about being vegetarian, it promotes being vegan. Like you start getting videos about being vegan. It's like you're never hardcore enough for YouTube, right? It's just constantly trying to push you to the edge. If you watch like normal stuff, mainstream stuff about, say, Islam as a religion, you will soon find yourself being autoplayed extremist, terrorist, ICC stuff. Whatever you are, YouTube is pushing you to the edge. Why is YouTube doing this? YouTube's not doing this because it's got a bunch of evil programmers. What's happening is that there's a new technology, and I'm a former programmer, right? This is the technology side. There's a new technology called machine learning, which if you feed it enough data, it picks up on what people's vulnerabilities are, right? And YouTube, the machine learning algorithm, which nobody programmed, Google just lets it loose and says, keep people on the site. Whatever you do, keep people on the site. That algorithm has figured out that being seduced into the edgier side of wherever you are. If you listen to rock, it will give you heavy metal. If you listen to heavy metal, it'll give you trash metal. If you listen to trash metal, it'll give you death metal, right? It's that annoying friend in college that's always outdoing you, right? What it's figured out is that this is a human vulnerability. So it will keep you on that thing. It will play and play and play while serving you ads. And this is the difference in the new reality. Facebook does a version of it. The algorithms on Facebook, its user interface flattens everything so that whether you're watching and whether you're seeing Denver Guardian, a fake newspaper, doesn't exist. I'm sorry, they made up a name. I think it was Denver Guardian. Or the New York Times. It looks the same. And if it is something that's going to keep you on the site, Facebook's algorithm will pick that and show you and not the other stuff. Because all it cares about is engagement. Everything is flat. Everything is content. And the thing I like in this too is that for very good reason, humans have weaknesses to sugar, salt, and fat. You evolved under the Pleistocene, right? I mean, if your ancestors didn't like sugar, salt, and fat, you probably wouldn't be here. Being slightly more extreme stuff, cuddly stuff, that's why your Facebook is full of babies. Stuff that's outrageous, stuff that says things you already believe in, stuff that pushes you into things that you already think are true. That's the sugar, salt, and fat of the information ecology. And we have two giant platforms, Facebook and Google, whose whole program is to give you sugar, salt, and fat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then, without content. So I think that's the big difference, is that when journalism failed, and I criticize journalism when it failed at least something to fail from. Whereas when YouTube and Facebook succeed, they are giving you the kind of things that aren't compatible, in my view, with a healthy public sphere. I think they're not compatible with a world in which we find a center, a world in which we come together. I mean, I know I've bashed Facebook all the time, and this gets worse. For those machine learning algorithms to work, they need a lot of data. So they have to be the super surveillance state. They have to get everything. They have to collect as much data they can about you so that they can figure you out. They can figure out your vulnerabilities person by person by person. And it gets even worse. I'm sorry to be such a downer, but I think we have to confront this. It's screen by screen. So you don't know what your neighbor is seeing. So you cannot have a world in which the good truth, the good speech, can crowd out the bad speech. Because it's directed at you and only you, whatever your vulnerabilities are. And we're doing all of this just to serve more ads. Like, I'm just going to finish. What I'm saying is this is an infrastructure we're building that is absolutely compatible with authoritarianism. It's absolutely compatible with kinds of power that I find scary because we won't even see it. It'll just happen. And I think we're just starting it. And what's worse for me, and that will be my last point, and then I know I'm just going on about this. What's worse for me is that Silicon Valley is good of very well-meaning people. They're not mean people. They're not evil people. They've set the structure up. If it was just a bunch of evil people, we would go get a good Mark Zuckerberg. We would get a good, Sergey Brin, and we would solve this problem. We've set up an environment in which we're promoting the worst things about our public sphere. And we're already paying the price for it in lots of countries. So this is the way in which I really worry that we're walking into, I've been calling it surveillance authoritarianism, a really dangerous historic moment. And I hope we don't go down this way.
Yeah, so I guess what really is worrying about the case that you are making is that we have this new technology on one hand, and on the other hand is these economic incentives. I mean, this basically comes down to the advertising model.
Correct.
It's
It's the business model.
It's the business model. It's about keeping people on the platforms for as long as possible to get their data. And so, as you say, there's no evil scheme behind it. It's just feeding into the loop of profit maximization, and there's nothing wrong with that. But how should one think about this then, as a private citizen, or even as someone who's worrying about democracy? What should we do? Should we get off the platforms? Should we regulate?
I don't think we can get off the platforms. I mean, to be honest, I think at this point, Facebook and Google are quasi-monopolies. I know Europe's acting about it at the moment. And I'm just talking about the damage it's doing in countries like, in places like Europe, like in a lot of countries, and countries like the United States. Think of how much this plays out for the next billion. Indonesia, Philippines, Myanmar. Facebook is the internet. Or Google. That's it. And if I get off Facebook, there are a large number of people with whom I would not be able to stay in touch because that's the only platform they use. 90% of every advertising dollar generated now goes to Facebook or Google.
Tell me about it. Working for a newspaper.
I know. There's a reason for it. That's where people are. Look, there's a cafeteria that is serving sugar, salt, and fat. And because of a bunch of reasons, these reasons are, it's network effects. If people are there, you're already going to go there.
So what do we do then? What do we do?
It's a combination. I think regulation of certain kinds of things is important. It shouldn't be stupid regulation. Like some of the things that are suggested aren't workable. We have to bring back meaningful competition. But if we just break Facebook up and we have five Facebooks operating under the same rules, there'll just be 5 horrible Facebooks. Instead of one big one that sometimes try to do things right, we'll have 5 horrible ones that don't try to do things right. We have to change their incentive structure. As long as their incentive structure is to keep you on the site, as long as possible to sell your eyeballs to the advertisers, we're not going to get rid of it. I feel like the business model has to be on the table. Facebook makes like $15 per person per year. We're ruining our public sphere for $15 per person per year. We should be the customer of Facebook. I would pay that $15 and I would pay that $30 so that somebody in the third world can have a subsidized version of this like this. It is not that expensive. I mean, yes, they're making a lot of money because they got 2 billion people. So we pay for phones, we pay for SIM cards, we pay for airtime. Why aren't we not the product of what we can do?
You're talking about going basically from an advertising model to a subscription
Correct. So
model.
we need to be, their loyalty and their fealty has to be to us, not to their advertisers. We have to limit how data can be collected. Right now, in the US at least, Facebook can buy all the data at once. In Europe, it has some limits. That can't happen. Right now, we've empowered algorithms, machine learning algorithms. We go and say, go ahead, use all the data and do what you want. We need to solve that. And the problem is, a lot of times people just want transparency over this. Because of the way, the technical way machine learning works, transparency isn't going to solve our problem because you can look at all the code, you can look at all the data, and not you, not the programmer, not anyone working on this any longer knows how it works. Google Translate, that magical thing that translates between languages so well, it's 500 lines of code. You will not be able to tell anything if you look at the code because machine learning works by building what's called neural networks. So if you slice my brain, you don't know what I'm thinking, right? You just see neurons. If you look at these algorithms, you don't know what they're thinking. So we have to have ways of dealing with a world in which we've turned over decision making to a kind of intelligence, machine intelligence, that we're no longer programming as much as growing by feeding it data. These are huge challenges. I feel like we can address all of this, but we have to do this. We have to bring more media literacy and awareness into all of this. And finally, I think we have to address what are the fractures in which these kinds of divisions are coming through that the social media, well, we have to address why is the sugar, fat, and salt of the information sphere, why is it so attractive? How can we dampen its attractiveness? How can we give people a healthier regime? So I think there's like a million things we need to do, but we need to sort of just be very realistic about what's going on and not just think, it's just a bunch of evil people in Silicon Valley. As I said, I wish that were the case.
It would be easier.
It would be easier.
I have one last question for you, because you have been studying the usage of social media, as you were talking about in the introduction, from people, from dissenters to authoritarian regimes. And in your latest book, Twitter and Tear Gas, you talk about how social media went from being a tool of revolutionaries to a weapon basically in the hand of authoritarian regimes. How does that work? Can you just talk about how they use it briefly?
So right now, we think a lot about free speech. I think about it. It's an important thing. It's an important American value. We have the First Amendment in the US. It's amazing. But if you think about the point of free speech is to have a marketplace of ideas and to have a sane dialogue between people. Whereas right now, what is limited is not speech, it's attention. What's in short supply and what is controlled by Silicon Valley is attention. And if you think about how authoritarians think, it's not that they used to keep information from the people. That is no longer feasible. But even if you can't break the link between information to people, you can break the link between information and action by polluting the attention sphere with information glut. You can just put so much information out there, people can't figure out what's going on. You can challenge the credibility of information. Fake news, it's not true, it's a hoax, it's not this. Like if you keep saying it and if you keep pumping that kind of propaganda so that there's so much noise that people can't tell the signal, that's the way of censorship. If you can distract people, China does this. When there is something going on here, China has the so-called 50 Cent Army, which these are people employed by the government. Researchers have found what they do is they don't go engage the political thing that's going on there. They go create a distraction there. So instead of censoring information, by manipulating attention, by flooding the information sphere with too much information, by challenging the credibility of the actual information, by undermining institutions, faulty or not, imperfect or not, who are dedicated to the unearthing of information and truth, right? We talked about academia, we talked about journalism, the previous panel talked about it. By undermining credibility in institutions whose job it is to unearth information, the information will still be there. For someone like me, there's never been a better time to get at information. But for the public sphere, you can no longer figure out, where is the correct information to act upon. And I think this method is not just something that works for authoritarians in Russia, in China. It's increasingly being used in our democracies to break the link between information and healthy action. And that's the one that we have to guard against, not the blocking of speech, because we can get the speech out. How do we get the attention? How do we get the credibility? Those are my questions.
So on that upbeat note,
I'm a cheery person. I think we can do this. I just feel like let's be realistic to what we face.
Thank you so much, Zeynep Tufekci. Thank you.
Thank you.